Here we are. Good. I'll probably butcher this. Apologies. Aljaz, thank you for joining me. It's I'm looking forward to this discussion and welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you were another one of the people that accepted my Calendly link to kind of book yourself in, and presumably because you had a few things you wanted to discuss. And we can break into pretty much anything. But before we do, can we and myself just get a bit of a background on who you are and what you do, and then we can take it from there?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO and founder of BoltObserver. We've been doing that for the last year, but before that, I worked for about 3.5 years as head of platform for Bitstamp, doing all kinds of things there, infrastructure, security, etc. Before that, I mostly enterprise IT, things like that. So that's briefly my background, more from the IT side, coming into this space.
Right. And you are from or based in Slovenia?
I am from Slovenia, but currently escaping the European winter in Mexico.
Oh, nice. Smart man. Yeah, I visited Ljubljana and a few other places in 2018. Lovely country, probably cold in the winter, but I enjoy myself in the summer.
Yeah, I can relate to the summer sentiment.
What was you said you worked at Bitstamp for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
What was what's your rabbit hole story? What was your entry into Bitcoin?
Oh, that's I guess I got into Bitcoin first around 2014, but purely as a way of paying for things anonymously and like moving money around, especially coming from more of a shithole country. We weren't exactly favorite on any popular fintech solutions like PayPal and stuff, so it was even harder to move money around or accepting money for services and stuff like that over the internet. So I got into that like 2014, but didn't really click for anything else. So used it a bit back then maybe kind of forgot about it for 2 years, I guess. Then I got back into the whole crypto scene late 2016. Did too much trading, let's say like that. Explored the whole blockchain space for a bit. And then at the beginning of 2018, I joined Bitstamp, started working there on infrastructure, getting deeper and deeper into rabbit hole, seeing that everything else really doesn't make that much sense. Still trade that way too much, but then finally I started playing with Lightning and getting down that rabbit hole, but then also going more onto the philosophical side of Bitcoin and monetary and everything else. So that's when it finally clicked, and it took me a couple more years to quit my enterprise job and finally started building something of my own on Bitcoin, but that's kind of the short of it.
Right. Bitstamp is a Slovenian company, right? It started in Slovenia?
It started in Slovenia. It hasn't really been a Slovenian company for quite a while, but
right. Was you said in 2014 the banking infrastructure, or maybe access to external banking infrastructure, was difficult in Slovenia. Was that the case, and is that still the case?
No, it's not. Now it's much easier, but even before 2014, like using services like PayPal and things like that was not that generally supported. Getting access to other services is a bit more complicated, which Bitcoin made extremely simple. So it really clicked for me from a payment side and permissionless money system, but not as much as a store of value for quite a longer time, because that was my primary use case, and I understood that immediately how much of a game changer it is that you can do something without some compliance officer somewhere agreeing that they recognize the name of your country somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. My impression when I was there in 2018 was that I don't know how to characterize it, but it seemed like there was quite a bit of startup energy there. Like Slovenia was becoming, or at least Ljubljana, or whatever that it was like a business tech hub district close by, was becoming a bit of a, kind of a success story maybe in Europe a little bit for kind of startup activity. Is that being too generous?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely went full in on the ICO craze.
Right. Well, yeah.
Because, I mean, the whole crypto scene was pretty big in Slovenia, especially because Bitstamp was one of the early success stories, like in
Right.
the space in general. So that, of course, influenced some of the local scene, as two founders from a local village created something that was very known in the space at the time. But yeah, 2017, everyone and their waitress had an ICO in Slovenia, so that fueled a lot of that craze. But there is a solid amount of activity going on. It's just that the whole environment, at least in my opinion, isn't very well suited for businesses and startups due to like legal issues or lack of legal infrastructure. I mean, I'm from Slovenia. Both of my co-founders are Slovenian, but we have a US entity, not a Slovenian one.
Right.
And there's a reason for that.
Right. After the 2017 ICO craze, I'm assuming, public opinion kind of soured on, well, rightfully soured on cryptocurrency, but probably lumped Bitcoin into that bucket as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's not as much Bitcoin scene. After quitting Bitstamp, I started creating local meetups, and we're starting to kickstart that a bit more, but it was highly more focused on entire shitcoin space,
right,
and lacking some deeper content on Bitcoin side. But we're addressing that now.
I noticed that one of the things you're into as well is you host the Ljubljana meetup, or you put it together or something like that. What's that like these days? So let's say 2017 was a bit rough, but what kind of interest in Bitcoin is there on the ground these days?
It's pretty good. We're getting around 40, 50 members monthly. So that's, I think, pretty solid for a small city startup, considering Ljubljana is not really a big city. And we also recently translated Bitcoin Standard, which got a bit publicity and
nice.
a bit more interest.
What do you guys do at the meetups?
We generally have a presentation every time, still trying to bootstrap the community to start presenting more. So it essentially started from a couple of friends. We were just meeting, talking Lightning all the time. Then at some point we realized, why don't we make this public and actually create events for it? Like there's gonna be interest. So we started deeply technical, more from like things that were of interest to us, and just gave us an excuse to like dedicate a couple hours, create a presentation. But now we're trying to also have more broader topics, or maybe now and then a session more for beginners in the space, maybe help them with some wallet setups, give out some sets. So trying to find a wider appeal, because the ecosystem is not big enough to justify bit dev types of event, or a broader appeal to get people into. But we still do deep dive technical sessions occasionally.
What's the regulatory climate like in Slovenia around Bitcoin?
Personal opinion, horrible. Not everyone would agree, but currently it's undefined. We've been getting promises of some regulation on general crypto situation, but it's kind of looks more like money grab from the government, just trying to not deal with people and push something through that will bring some additional revenue in without any sensible approach to like what's used for payments, what's Bitcoin, or separation Bitcoin and everything else. So it's not very well put through, but I think that's general sentiment in the entire European Union, that let's just run away from it while we can.
So Slovenia uses the euro and is part of the EU?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess that makes it a little bit more challenging to do anything unique.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, if you think about it, Bitcoin should be regulated as FX. So considering it is a legal tender in a country somewhere on the planet, so in
Yeah,
Slovenia,
well, sure, I agree, but selective application of that law, I guess, because nobody, I'm not aware of a country that's treating it that way because it's an official currency of another country.
yeah, I'm hoping that somewhere somebody takes this to court to the highest level, and then case law.
Yeah, hopefully. Can individual EU countries, they can't declare legal tender other than the euro, can they?
No, I don't think so.
Can they? Do they have their own right to of taxation? Can they just say there's no capital gains on divestment of a particular thing like Bitcoin?
Yeah, because the taxation laws are different across European Union countries.
Right. So any country could just say there's no tax on Bitcoin sale, and then it's effectively, that's better in my opinion. I don't think, I mean, legal tender laws are just kind of arbitrary and top down anyways. I think the most advantageous treatment, which would allow for the most organic growth and use of an adoption of Bitcoin, would just be a hands-off approach. Like no reporting requirement, no penalization for anything, no capital gains. That would be the best.
I mean, no argument there. I'm just thinking from a slightly more practical approach, because I don't think that's where we're heading.
Right.
Anytime soon.
Don't some countries, I think Germany might, or it might be the case for Germany and gold. I think it was the case for Portugal. After you hold it for a year, which would be very difficult to prove one way or the other, there's no capital gains tax on divesting of Bitcoin. I think Portugal used to have something like that.
Yeah, and also many other countries have something like that for other investments as well. So any kind of capital gains, if you hold it up more than 10 years or something like that. So I mean, in Bitcoin ethos, that would probably be very acceptable for most of the people, but I'm afraid we won't get that reasonable approach from governments to approach this, but it's going to be more trying to just find one broom and just sweep everything into one basket and possibly come up with the worst possible solution for everything, as governments tend to.
Yeah, you're probably right. So apart from this winter stint in Mexico, are you do you live in Slovenia?
Well, I'm currently trying to find a new home for myself, new place to call home. So I'm trying to explore something more permanently warm, hopefully local.
Madeira, something like Madeira?
Or I kind of lean towards Latin America as well, especially since adoption here is a bit better than it seems like a good place to be for somebody who's trying to build a Bitcoin company.
Yeah. Have you been to El Salvador?
Yeah, of course.
What'd you think?
Well, the country is nice. The adoption could be better. But,
well, this is the point, right? I mean, you can't legislate adoption. Anyone can make Bitcoin legal tender. You can't make people use it, really. And I think that's the case there. And there's probably several reasons for that. The initial education was lacking. The Chivo rollout was a disaster. But and they're benefiting in other ways, of course, from the Bitcoin announcement, the brand of the country, lots of Bitcoiners going there, investments, all that kind of stuff, and the other policies from Bukele, let's say. But my impression is on the ground, I mean, apart from like McDonald's and Starbucks and that kind of stuff, very few people are enthusiastic about Bitcoin. But they're not, don't get me wrong, like my impression also wasn't that they're hating on Bukele for it. They're not anti the policy. It's just, one among many of his policies that, they support, but it's not that relevant to them at this point.
Yeah, exactly. The rollout was very bad, in my opinion. I visited last year for adopting Bitcoin conference, and like nothing worked. I mean, yes, it worked in McDonald's, but like people were struggling with Chivo. the app was nowhere. I mean, if you think about it, it was like 3 months since the announcement to the implementation. Like, there's a reason these things usually take longer. Even getting an app that works out in 3 months, it's pretty wild. But if you actually need to create an infrastructure for the entire country, could have taken a bit more time, slowed it down, because I think in this case, move fast and break things was not the best approach.
Yeah.
But also mostly educating people, that's where I think they failed the most, because speaking with people, like besides those that were already in the space or understood it, it was very hard to tell them, and especially the separation of Chivo and Bitcoin was not clear, or is still not clear. But I think I was also there last November, a couple of months ago. The infrastructure is much better now. Like when you pay with Bitcoin, things just work if they're using IBEX or any other solution.
Right. If they use anything other than Chivo, it works pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot less people accepting it compared to a year ago. So we'll see how that story ends. I mean, I'm still bullish on the long term about El Salvador, but I'm strongly hoping they also create an environment that's more friendly for businesses, because that would solve a lot of problems for many funders that want to accept Bitcoin. Well, have a subsidiary in El Salvador and your problems are solved like that. But all the bureaucracy that usually follows you in Latin America isn't necessarily the most conducive to insane amount of companies rushing to get into El Salvador. So you still need the rest of the infrastructure, not just a bill saying that you can pay with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I've heard the same from people that have looked into it. You know, the government at least claimed that they were rewriting a bunch of their you know, commercial laws or whatever they're called to be more conducive to business, to, you know, free market principles, let's say. And I think, I'm not sure if that legislation was bundled in with the volcano bond stuff, but have you looked into it? Like, is it still just crazy bureaucracy and not very, you know, so-called open for business?
I've heard that they're supposed to do something soonish, but I didn't check if that was bundled into the volcano bond thing. I'm kind of don't want to break my teeth on trying to do this, letting somebody else figure it out first. But even among friends, people we talk to, there is interest in having that option. It's just, let's make it easier. Like, you can click together a company in Delaware in 5 minutes. We need that level of service.
Man, it just seems like there's such an insane opportunity. Like if they, well, first of all, everything seems on the up and up. I've been there 3 times, and every time I go there, things are improving. The energy and the vibe is better. People are optimistic. There's lots going on, you know, so it definitely seems like it's going in the right direction. And the Bitcoin thing is obviously a positive for many reasons. But if they would just, you know, put that last piece of the puzzle where they, you know, were open for business, everything was as efficient and streamlined as it could be, as open free market as it could be, you know, the impact on a small country like that of that cat getting out of the bag, and all these entrepreneurs and all these investors and all these people that want to escape Slovenia, Canada, wherever they're from, and go live in basically a tropical paradise, would be, I think, would have a tremendous impact on the country in a very short period of time. So, and I mean, they must be aware of that, because they don't seem like they're stupid over there. So maybe it's just difficult to, you know, turn around the bureaucratic Titanic or something like that.
Yeah, I'm imagining that might be one of the cases, but I'm strongly hoping that it actually happens, because it would be great. And the country is nice, food is great. I always love spending time there, and I'm always sorry that I didn't book a longer trip. But
yeah,
they should definitely do a bit more to make it easier to get there. And
yeah, well, I mean, once people start showing up with a whack of Bitcoin to spend, then, you know, there's going to be businesses that respond to that incentive, and they make it easy to spend Bitcoin, and others will take note. I mean, as you said, we have to appreciate how early it is. You know, that the law went in passed or was implemented in the fall of 2021 or 2022. think it was 2021, right? So it's like, a year and a half old, which is absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. So put another 5 years on that, another 10. And, again, if things continue to go well and the violence is kept in check and all that jazz, then I'm very bullish on the prospects for El Salvador.
I mean, even the locals I spoke with are very bullish. People are starting to return from US back to El Salvador, which is a generally very good sign that country is going in the right direction. Well, people start to migrate back. It's just probably going to take a bit more time to get all the ducks in a row. And I think also the timing of the market doesn't help, because
no, of course,
not many Bitcoiners are very keen to drop lots of sets on paying for coffee and goods right now. So because we're all stacking, so then maybe there's even less demand locally.
And also everyone who, locally in El Salvador, who kind of got excited about everything happening at, all-time highs, basically, now they're feeling the pain of being where we are. So that definitely puts a wet blanket on things. But still, I mean, I had, my experience with locals was very similar. Like I talked to a couple taxi drivers going to and from the center of town one day. And like even just the pace of the turnaround is what I think generates a lot of that optimism and positive energy, because both of them shared with me that even just in 2018, so 4 years ago, down in that, like one of the main squares, even locals were afraid to go there, and they certainly wouldn't bring anything of value like a phone or a camera or anything like that, because there's so much crime and there's so much violence. And now, I mean, we walked through there, not only like felt safe, but locals were sitting on the park benches saying, "Hey, welcome to El Salvador, welcome to San Salvador." And it was hustling and bustling, and people were selling goods, and in their own words, they were like, it's a complete 180. Now we feel safe, we feel free, we can go about whatever our thing is, pursuing a better life for ourselves, and we don't have to worry about the violence and the crime and that kind of stuff. And just imagine what kind of effect that has on people that were beaten down by the fear and anxiety of that kind of circumstance for so long. Like, if you're worried about being extorted or the gangs or, crime or violence of any kind, you don't want to go beyond your known territory. It doesn't inspire you to go out and make the most of life. If anything, you withdraw. And now the opposite is happening, and they're coming from such a, this is the wrong way to put it, but kind of a low state. You had the many year civil war, and then you had a brief, reprisal from that, or reprieve from that. And then you had, a decade of horrendous gang violence. And I'm always amazed that despite those two things and how recent they were, the people seem so friendly and warm and generous and kind. Like everyone I met when I was there was just awesome. Like better than most people I've met in most countries, strangely enough.
Yeah, I totally agree with the sentiment. And people are awesome, always willing to help, generous and everything. And I've never felt unsafe in El Salvador, and I've walked around San Salvador pretty extensively, been to the city center, everything. It's just, I mean, there's more military on the streets in Mexico than San Salvador by a big margin.
Yeah.
So I've heard the expression that the El Salvador will become the Singapore of Latin America thrown around a couple of times, and I deeply hope that that's going to be true. That's why I'm potentially excited to spend some more time there, to be at the beginning of that story, which could be a beautiful one.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And all the better if some of the surrounding countries in the area that, well, haven't been the most stable or prosperous countries, if they can get on the upswing as well, that would certainly make it easier. Because, the other thing about El Salvador and Bukele is that, and I love it, because he's basically, I know he's still a politician, and, statists are gonna state, but he's flipping the middle finger to a lot of the incumbent, legacy powers, geopolitical, financial, or otherwise, which is great to see. But, they're such a tiny country, and, the influence or the intervention by the US or the IMF, or the World Bank in Latin American countries, particularly small Latin American countries over the last 100 years, is well documented. And so, I'd like it for that target to be a little bit more dispersed and not like solely focused on El Salvador, because, who the hell knows, what could happen, or what the so-called powers that be would have plans for them.
Well, if the volcano bond pans out, I think we've set a precedent for a new geopolitical order, because there's plenty of countries that would have probably taken this approach, or would at least consider it, if they could get rid of IMF and all the interventionist policies that come with it. So I'm strongly hopeful in that direction, because I think it could set a very nice precedent of how things could look in the future.
Yeah, me too. Have they been marketed yet, the volcano bonds?
No, I don't think, because the volcano bond bill was like prerequisite for that. So
that hasn't passed yet.
Every time I look into it, it's soon TM.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. Well, that's the other. I mean, if it goes through, and if it becomes an attractive offering, and you have to kind of think in a world, maybe not full of, but with a lot of negative yielding debt, that something like, at least my understanding of how the volcano bond will be structured, that'll be at least attractive to at least some bond investors globally, and maybe a decent portion. I mean, as you say, I mean, that would really upset the existing financial order of things, or at least has the potential to. And so, I mean, the bond sale could be good for the country, but the ire that the bond sale will generate might not be so good for the country. So,
we'll see. I mean, I think that at least the amount is relatively small, and there's enough Bitcoiners in the world that have bags big enough to drop something in the bucket, because it's just, I mean, it's bad to say, but it's also a great experiment. Like,
totally.
People have burned a lot more than just 1 billion on a lot more stupid shit in the last couple of years and couple of bull markets. So I think even from that perspective, they should be able to get it together, even if it's just coming from inside the ecosystem, not necessarily from more traditional bond investors and other sources of capital. But it would definitely be good to see non-Bitcoiner capital coming in, because that would set a better precedent for the next country, and more global adoption of it.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it is a big experiment. And again, whatever you think of existing systems of governance, you got to hand it to Bukele, who's, willing to stick his neck out and run these types of experiments, because they're novel and they're new and they're unfamiliar to everybody. And, he's making a big bet in many ways on the future of Bitcoin. And you and I and all the Bitcoiners listening are probably don't think that's much of a risky bet, but the rest of the world certainly does. And, especially for a politician to be the first to do something like that, because, they're always covering their asses, and they're, they don't have the courage to step outside the bounds of sanctioned discourse or political behavior oftentimes, let alone, have any semblance of honesty or integrity. But, it seems like he's willing to do what he thinks is best, and dare I say right, at least in some ways or in some capacity. So, long may it continue.
Yeah, I mean, let's see what happens. I definitely think that if his bet plays off, Bitcoin will be a kingmaker for him, because it will significantly improve the country and rise their status in the region, which will also have impact on surrounding countries, either by making it easier for them to go down the same path, or just by trade and everything else. So I think
just do the same thing, or something, something similar. Follow the framework to some degree. And I mean, there's always you always benefit from being the first, so like, as other countries make different changes, they probably won't receive the same like bump from the publicity and the press and the Bitcoiners that the first one gets. But if we're right about Bitcoin, then any country that does anything conducive to, incentivizing a flourishing Bitcoin economy would presumably be beneficial to the people and the country. So.
Absolutely, but being the first also has its downside because you break your teeth on a lot of things.
Right.
So being the second might be more beneficial because you learn from the mistakes of the first one. So your rollout gets much smoother. Like now we kind of know what it takes to roll Bitcoin infrastructure out for the entire country, or at least which mistakes you try to avoid. So the process is improved. You know that you need to invest more into education and everything. So I think whoever's the second might have it significantly easier, at least in terms of making less mistakes and the infrastructure itself being more mature. Like
Sure.
Lightning has progressed significantly in the last year and a half since that happened and everything else. So it's going to be definitely easier for the next one.
Totally. Did you hear anything while you were there, or do you have any, inside knowledge as to why there was so little education surrounding the rollout?
Nothing specific, but it was so fast. It was 3 months, so like it's very hard. It's still a government bureaucracy. What happens in 3 months? They probably can agree on the color of the toilet paper, let alone roll out education of a new monetary system.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're right, but something as stupidly simple as like every phone number, every SIM card gets a PDF of like what is Bitcoin and how to use it. Or when you sign up for Chivo and you input something, phone number, email address, you get sent like just a one pager. Because as you say, I mean, I don't think there was anything actually. And people just were told that they had $30 waiting for them on Chivo, and that, I guess, spread. Yeah. And people would sign up just to claim that, basically cash out and never use it again. And it didn't seem like there was any education at any step in that process, which seems like a huge missed opportunity. Because if at least you're going to give people $30, throw them a little one pager.
Yeah. At least make them read a one pager and go through 3 questions in the end or something like that. But also they didn't benefit from general mistrust in the government, considering the history of El Salvador. So that also didn't significantly help the whole new government money, because this is how at least some people understood it. Like it's a digital money that the government can steal easier from us. So that's what also some of the sentiment that was shared, at least that I heard, especially the 21 visit.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell me what you've been working on, or what your primary focus is, other than hosting the Bitcoin meetup and stuff. Tell me what you're up to.
Well, considering I've been playing with Lightning for quite a few years, since late 2018, and also ran the infrastructure at Bitstamp, I kind of started BoltObserver to merge my experience on the enterprise side of Bitcoin and crypto and custody and everything, and all the tooling that's needed in this space. So what we're trying to do is create an enterprise stack of software that eliminates lots of the complexity of running your Lightning node, liquidity management, but also more boring stuff that businesses need. I know you need an access for an accountant. You're not giving him SSH access and here, figure it out. No, you want to connect with QuickBooks button somewhere in the software and things like that. Because I mean, currently there is some open source tooling out there, but it's more aimed at enthusiasts and hackers who like to play around. But if you're a business, you still sooner or later need to get a PhD in node management and liquidity and all that, but that shouldn't be necessary for you to work on Lightning. So you have River now released the RLS service, which is a great step towards it, but it's still a custodial option. So what we're trying to build is an alternative to this, so you can still do your own custody, but with our stack, we will just remove all the complexity, and essentially the node will run for you, manage liquidity. You can set some business rules, things like that. And based upon that, the operation should run smoothly and you can focus on your business. So that's kind of where we're focusing at.
So it's both node management, all the things you need to consider to make sure there's no hiccups and no failed transactions and all that kind of stuff, non-custodial, but also like analytics and data for, you know, getting insights into how your business is operating and how it's basically your business's involvement or activity on the Lightning Network. Yeah,
exactly. So we started last year, about a year ago, with simple monitoring. So we're just letting you know if your node is reachable over all the options, so Tor, IPv4, Lightning Network, things like that, with all the possible integrations. Then we're slowly adding up to our stack, building on top of that. We have our own Explorer, which we developed from our internal needs, because if you want to reach all the nodes on the network, you need to deploy your own infrastructure in a smart way. So we're approach that more of from a data side and exploring the network from the viewpoint of your node instead of a top-down approach. And now we've built some liquidity services in terms of just making you aware where you are, maybe get waken up in the middle of the night if something happened with your node. And soon TM, we're also bridging that into the other side of full management, where you will essentially just set up some rules and liquidity will be managed for you.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of companies getting into this space. You know, I don't know if it's there's probably some nuance in the differences between them all, but basically, you know, liquidity as a service, or Lightning management as node management as a service, or, you know, that kind of stuff. What I guess the question is, what do you think, or not what you think, based on your experience, what has been the biggest problem that such solutions are helping to address? Like what are the main choke points or issues that people that are managing their own nodes are having at this stage of Lightning's development?
Well, it's kind of depends on the profile of the person running it, or the business that you're trying to build on it. So routing nodes, I would say, are not our primary focus, at least not people just trying to create yield from routing, because that's, if you're good at this, you've been doing this for a couple of years and you've gained a lot of experience, you have a lot of automation, etc., built in that direction already. But if you're going more into the business side, or focusing a layer higher, for example, we have a partnership with Breeze, Roy and the team, they're trying to create an ecosystem environment for people to build on Lightning. So there's definitely a need to just help you with operation, because all the companies in this space are smaller, at least most of us are small. So like if you have a 3-person team, you're not hiring somebody who just does node management. That's like insanely inefficient in terms of your headcount or where your investment is going.
Mm-hmm.
So either people are not managing that properly, or at least maybe have enough capital deployed on the node that they can be a bit sloppy with it. But also the space is still small. So you say, oh, I'm starting a new company, maybe some people will open channels to me and that will be okay for now. But the more the space grows, the more there will be a need for an actual efficient deployment of the capital, because you won't just throw away sets, and eventually people will actually want to have something in return for their sets, or not have insane operational costs just by rebalancing and figuring out what to do, losing business opportunities because like somebody forgot to rebalance the node and people couldn't pay for 3 days. Like things like that are, you don't think about it if you're using, I don't know, Stripe for credit card payments. Like you never think about, oh, at some point maybe I won't be able to accept the payment. No, I mean, okay, maybe the API goes down, but you can't do anything about it. But here in Lightning space, you're responsible for that part as well. So one option is you use a custodial service, but that brings you higher fees and other complications. And potentially when the if not, when not, if the space gets more regulated, you will all of a sudden, even though you're using Lightning, maybe get some constraints on where you can accept payments from and things like that. Like we already see Cash App is only connecting to like known peers and KYC identities and things like that. So we're already starting to see small subsections of Lightning Network or subnetworks, if you will. So if you want to go more sovereign, non-custodial route, you need to have good insight of what you're doing, but also businesses are still small. So besides exchanges, I don't think anybody is turning around thousands of Bitcoins per month on their Lightning node as a merchant. So things kind of still work, or it's not that bad, but the more adoption we get, like the more use cases that come into the space, the more finely tuned this will need to be. Yes, currently, I mean, if you've been in the space for a couple of years, you know that 3 years ago, payments were maybe yes, maybe no. Now, like sending from a wallet to a wallet generally works, but like all the wallets are like just hyper connected between themselves because, you know, I don't know, from ZBD to wallet of Satoshi, there's going to be tons of payments. They're going to open a channel. But when the topology of the network starts growing and we have, I don't know, more self-custody for people, or I don't know, Fedimins or wallets like social custody, like Bitcoin Beach, things like that, you will have more islands of liquidity that will have to communicate between themselves. And so then that's where you need to deploy the capital smartly and start thinking about actually managing that liquidity, because you won't be able to just connect to 3 big providers if we actually get into a world when Lightning Network is sufficiently decentralized and we're not just all using 5 custodial services.
So what you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you guys provide is software to automate an individual company's management of their nodes so that they don't have to, so they can remain non-custodial. Is that
yes,
a proper way to characterize it?
Yeah.
What do you think, you know, you mentioned kind of a world where people are more discerning about the channels they open and whom with, you know, and kind of alluding to, you know, the potential for a kind of censorship in, you know, in the Lightning Network, or at least in maybe censorship's the wrong word, but there's something akin to that in selecting only, you know, known partners, let's say. And what risks do you think there are? You know, this is kind of a 2-part question. With one, as you mentioned, like how it may tend towards centralization, as you know, you just get these big hubs of liquidity that people connect to facilitate all their transactions, and then that becomes a risk because, you know, they could intervene or censor transactions or cut off liquidity, and then just censorship generally in the Lightning Network, and how you see developments over the last 3 years unfolding.
I mean, firstly, I wouldn't characterize that as censorship, because the permissionless also implies that like you can decide not to connect with somebody. Like if the network is permissionless, you're not forced to do business with anyone.
Right. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, we understand the separation. Of course, nobody likes that this is happening, but I'm afraid that this is going to start to happen more and more, because at some point, the regulators will need to figure out. Currently, the amounts are small; they have bigger fish to fry. But at some point, many different things can happen. So, like maybe you will need a monitor transmitter license. That will all of a sudden throw a wrench in 95% of the businesses, because like the cost of regulation will be too big for a small business to operate. So then you just have regulatory capture by River and a couple of OpenNode and a couple of other bigger providers that will do it as a service. So that's what I'm afraid of the most. So we need to figure things out in a way and start maybe positioning ourselves against that, because the current sentiment of, yeah, let's try to work with regulators to find a loophole how we will operate is not good. on firstly, pushing exchanges toward Lightning is maybe slightly misguided because there's not that many use cases. It's for exchanges, it's currently more of a vanity project, even though I'm pretty sure people will be mad at me for saying that. But
well, why do you say it? Just because it's not tremendously relevant to the business that they're in, like, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're not doing, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the volume that exchanges do on Lightning is noticeable in the accounting in general. So it's very useful for people, but like does it really bring that much to an exchange in pure business value of the trading fees, more people trading? Not necessarily. I do think there's a huge upside to trading in Lightning with because it enables traders to be significantly more capital efficient because you lose the need to pre-fund. So that's another story, but we're not there yet because firstly, the network is not big enough. So if you still need to have channels open for to all the exchanges, you didn't do anything in terms of pre-funding. So we still need a bit more maturity to get to that point where you could, I don't know, arbitrage between exchanges over Lightning. But that's something that I'm definitely very interested in, how it plays out. But on the other hand, if you're a regulated exchange, now you have Lightning. All of a sudden, like at some point, somebody needs to explain to an auditor, oh, this is that. No, we don't do KYC, or we don't know where this came from. It just came from. And like, sooner or later, somebody will say, okay, this is a small amount now, so maybe we're not bothered by it right now, but at some point, let's figure this out. So with that, we might be doing ourselves more damage than benefits to do it this early, because I'm not sure the industry is big enough that we can fight, or the industry is in Lightning industry that we can survive this if some very strict regulation applies to this, or at least it will slow down the progress a bit of everyone.
What do you think the alternative is right now, if not to like pursue this path and, like, I mean, partially assume the regulatory reaction is not going to be that onerous, and partially assume you'll be able to push back on it in some way? What would you think is the more appropriate approach?
We need more use cases. We need people to actually start using Lightning for what it's meant, for payments, not to withdraw your profits from an exchange. Sure, it's fun, it works, it's good to see, it's fast, but like, it's meant to be a payment network. Like, let's create a local merchant solution for every country. Let's onboard people to value for value systems more and more. Like, we need to create more demand bottom up. So then it's also easier to have a conversation with the government. Like, people are just using it as cash, so let's treat it as cash instead of just, the thing that was always portrayed as, Bitcoin is just for traders. The first application is, let's put Lightning on exchanges. That's not necessarily the wisest approach.
Right. What would you say? Because you mentioned the risk for all this liquidity centralizing, and then the more easily being having regulatory capture on the big providers. What do you think the consequences of that would be, and how do you think that is avoided, given that just kind of the structure of Lightning and the reliability of liquidity and stuff like that, which, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of tends toward centralization? So if that is the case, and then you have what seems to be, and like this, I might just be somewhat pessimistic here, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of regulatory intervention in the next couple of years, and everyone's going to be slapped with a money transmitter thing. And as you say, only the larger entities will be able to, meet the requirements, let's say. And then, so what is the risk of them having met the requirements? What could the regulators impose on them in terms of interrupting people's use of Lightning?
Well, even if we just say travel rule that's happening for on-chain transactions and all of that, it will essentially, it can lose all the self-custody benefits and everything if you're just prevented by doing transactions from wallets or self-custodial if you don't have a KYC wallet installed on your app. But I think the problem comes from the other side, I think. Currently, in the last couple of years, the network topology didn't really grow naturally in terms of there was a demand somewhere and the cluster of liquidity was created around it. It was more, there's tons of enthusiasts, and then, yes, let's connect to the 5 biggest nodes in the network because we will have some liquidity and maybe we will gamify our ranking that somebody invented and it will show us in the top 10 score on some random website somewhere, but that doesn't serve a real economic purpose. So with more real economic activity coming on the network, I think we will see topology develop more organically. So you will see more clusters where there's something going on. So for example, if you're a merchant in El Zonte, you're not going to be sending your payment through Australia and Japan to your neighbor. Like, you're going to use some local liquidity provider or have your own node or Bitcoin Beach wallet, things like that. So when we have more and more of this, I think the topology will start to go more towards how internet is designed. So you have like local or regional hubs that are hyper connected, and you're not streaming the video to your neighbor across the world. You're doing it through the first hub. So I hope or think that the network will start growing that, but for that we need like actual adoption. So more circular economies or regional adoption instead of currently just us using Fountain and ZBD and getting sets from Thunder Games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, that's always been the thing, the most important thing, right? More adoption. And oftentimes you run into kind of a chicken and egg sort of scenario, but yeah, I agree with you. But I guess, like, what do you think is, well, I mean, I think, first of all, it must be noted, it's interesting how all this develops and then people come in at different stages of Bitcoin's, you know, life cycle, or, you know, depending on what year they come in and with what philosophy they come in. I mean, in my perspective, Bitcoin is meant to be so-called black market money, right? It's supposed to be non-state money. And then, but, you know, things evolve and you develop solutions and things work for a time because the regulatory framework is lax or unclear. And then there, you know, this whole conversation around, well, like, how do we interface with the regulatory environment? And perhaps that's sensible because, you know, maybe there are ways to finagle something that works for a time. But so with that context, my question is kind of what do you think the consequences are of the centralization and the regulatory capture? And what do you think the response will be in terms of developing an ecosystem that is impervious to regulatory intervention?
That's a tough one. I mean, I'm pretty on the extreme side that government should not exist in the current condition. So my response to that will be, we should definitely fight any kind of regulation because nobody should be forcing us to be in our pockets and in our
But do you mean fight the regulation at the regulatory level, or fight it by just building solutions that make the regulations obsolete?
That never works. I mean, it does, but it also doesn't, because yes, it works for people who go deep into the rabbit hole and know how to use the tech. But like for my mom, she's not gonna figure out how to use Tor and 700 different solutions to bypass KYC for buying groceries. So we need to fight back at the grassroots level of actually educating people that the idea of government giving you permission to spend your money is not the default state of the world. It's something that came up fairly recently in the human history. So we should denormalize the level of surveillance that the countries are imposing on us and actually starts from there, not trying to just fight, oh, we don't want to pay that much taxes on our Bitcoin. No, we should fight for our privacy and our freedom to actually spend our money as the way we want it.
I mean, I totally agree with you, but my impressions of the world as it is today and the way that most people think, going back to that chicken and egg dilemma, I would say that all those people will need a strong financial incentive first before they, develop a different philosophy or perspective on these things. So it's difficult to persuade people to think about these things differently in advance of them seeing it as a necessity. And we would all probably think that Bitcoin is a response to a necessity. And that's why we're so into it. And then, of course, by virtue of being in it, that also refines your perspective and your philosophy as you go deeper down the rabbit hole, as it were. But I don't know. There just seems something wrong about like fighting all these regulatory. I get what you're saying. Like mom and pop aren't going to use it unless there's some kind of sanction. But again, isn't that regulatory capture in itself if you're acquiescing to, if you're coming to the regulatory table, let's say, because the whole premise of that is they're going to attempt to maintain some semblance of control over you and your money and how you spend it. Because if not, then what's the point of them trying to engage with you? So, where do you draw the line between undoing what this whole thing is about in the first place and trying to make it palatable enough and have sufficient regulatory flexibility to develop solutions that will be attractive to mom and pop and people that can't jump through all the hoops to remain private and anonymous or, outside the system?
I mean, down the road, I don't think that's possible. I mean, even if you look at what's currently happening in Europe with the chat control proposal, it's like 1984 seems like a fairy tale compared to what European Union is turning into.
Yeah, so, but you're saying it's not possible? That's good. You must have a pretty, pessimistic view on the future then.
No, I'm saying that it's not possible to actually come to some sensible conclusion, because the tendency of the government is always to overreach and to get deeper into our lives.
Right.
So I think one of the solutions is get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible, so then they see the use case. Because I speak with normie friends and they said like, oh, I'm trying to, but yeah, sending money to Vietnam is very easy now. And they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, I've never sent money out of the country. I can't point to Vietnam on the map. Why would I send money there? But with, I don't know, gaming is a great use case. Just get some Bitcoin in the hands of people, or podcasting, or I don't know. We need to find more ways to onboard people by not buying Bitcoin, but by earning it or getting it through gift cards, gaming, actually watching ads or whatever schemes. So they get exposure to it, and then they say, okay, I've played some solitaire on my phone like I do, and all of this I can pay coffee with it. But then the government says, no, but you can't pay coffee with it because you need to submit like 7 pages of paperwork to spend $2 for it. Then maybe people start to think, wait, why does the government care about that? Why should I do that? Because it's the same as having $2 in your pocket. And if every time you want to spend $2 from your pocket, there would be a government official asking you, oh, can you show me your ID? Where did you get those $2? We wouldn't be having this conversation, because there would be people on the streets fighting against it. So I think we just need to spread the awareness of it as wide as possible, but by actually getting people to use it, to see how it's valuable, to create new use cases. Because I mean, Lightning is ubiquitous. For example, I'm very bullish on combination of Nostr and Lightning, because it can do lots of that for people that there's lots of people on Twitter that don't necessarily care about Lightning, but if they use an app for Nostr that automatically accepts tips for them, well, nobody's gonna throw away free money. So that's a very good way to onboard people and to a much wider circle than the current community that we're all living in an echo chamber and not talking to normal people outside too much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'll touch on in a second how strong of an incentive the monetization of so much of your digital life, gaming, social media, this idea of the value enabled web, right? I mean, again, as you say, even people that don't really give a shit about sound money and don't see the problems of a fiat money standard and all that kind of stuff. If you're just playing whatever the fuck people play these days, like Call of Duty or Minecraft or whatever, and the in-game currency is a currency you can spend anywhere in the world rather than just within the ecosystem of the game, well, that's kind of a game changer. And the same is true for whatever social media platform you use. If your tweet, if all the likes are payments, well then, one, how much does that incentivize you to use the platform? And then from a content consumer's perspective, well, I'm producer, but how much does that up the value of the content that's being created when there's a financial tether or incentive to the quality of the content? I think that could quite interestingly influence the type of content that gets created and that gets propagated. But before we maybe delve into that a bit, why couldn't, so to your point, you make the in-game money, you try to spend the coffee, but you have a reporting requirement, and that just nullifies the benefit and it creates too much friction and all that kind of stuff. Why can't all this be built outside of regulatory awareness? So in an anonymous way. So for example, you create an account with Thunder Games anonymously. It's just your email address, and you earn a bunch of sats by playing a game. And then you go spend it into the Bitcoin circular economy. Maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's a restaurant. There's no identifying information on any of the transactions that lead back to you, and you just contribute to that parallel economy in an anonymous way. No regulators can nail you down, and that's how it grows. Why, in your opinion, could that not be the way that this ultimately scales all the way up to a competing parallel system and ultimately the dominant one?
I mean, that's the dream, but I think it's a kind of a chicken and egg problem, because the adoption is not there yet. Like, you don't have that many Bitcoiners. Maybe it works in Austin or some other places that are swarming with Bitcoiners, but in a smaller city, it's hard to currently find that many people who would just accept that. So by extent, you need to convince some merchants to use it. And the way government is usually impose regulation is like, you don't forbid accepting Bitcoin. You just raise the bar so high that it doesn't make sense, because currently 2 people per quarter will pay you with Bitcoin, and you will need to install new software, get a new vendor for your point of sale system, because you will need to report, I don't know what, to your tax office for that Lightning transaction. So it's, by just imposing the technological burden, it raises the cost so much that it doesn't start at all, because it's not worth it. So if we get Bitcoin into hands of many people, then instead of 2 people per quarter, you have 2 people per hour trying to pay for coffee with Bitcoin. Then it's okay, not a problem. There's lots of people demanding it. Let's use it. But for that, we need significantly more people using it as payment and get it into significantly more people's hands. But also, for that to happen, we need to maybe make the space slightly more approachable, because I still don't think we have any wallets that I would like to be the IT support for my parents.
And what about that question from a few minutes ago, where a lot of the liquidity moves to the bigger providers? They're subject to regulatory capture. What do you see as the impact or downsides of that? Like, is it just that each individual has to be KYC'd, so they give up privacy, and then there's the added friction of whatever reporting requirements come with that, or is there a broader risk that you see to that?
I mean, broader risk if we let that happen is that we've spent significant amount of time and energy for something that didn't change anything. If like that really turns into that dystopian future. But on the other hand, like there is a Lightning network, but essentially there can be hundreds of Lightning networks. Like we can just open channels between you and me, and we have a Lightning network. It's a small network, but it works. And that's like Lightning is like internet. First, nobody thinks about the internet. You go to Facebook, or you visit your local web shop. You can be cut off from parts of the internet, but the internet still works. So as long as Lightning is distributed enough, you can either avoid the regulated pockets, work around them, or maybe you're captured inside them. That's definitely one potential, but also the way Lightning works, that's kind of hard to do. Or at least then you get a closed network that just settles between, I don't know, 5 KYC exchanges, but you kind of know that upfront, because then it's just like using a Revolut or another fintech bank. It's not exactly an open network anymore. But right. I think that it is one scenario, but it's also like that's, I don't know, for users within one app that has lots of users, or maybe, I don't know, Strike, Cash App, or whatever, they create essentially a conglomerate. We still got a small benefit of at least, I don't know, a couple hundred million users being able to transact across several platforms. Is it great? No. Can we find alternatives for that? Absolutely, but I don't see that that would succeed in a way that we can't work around it, because you can just open a channel to somewhere else. You can start using a different wallet. It's not like the benefit of Lightning is that it's not on chain. So you don't have a ledger, global ledger that everyone can see. You can do what you want. You can send payments however you want, or you can use a pediment. There's tons of ways to actually transfer your money around through different channels. So I don't know, you can do a swap somewhere in between, things like that. So I think we need to work a bit more on Lightning to make it more uncensorable or more private, which will definitely be greatly accepted by anyone trying to implement any AML and the KYC is on top of it. But if it's not possible to do it, then we won't do it, because it's like physics. You can't fight with physics, so you can't regulate gravity, even though I'm pretty sure somebody would want to tax it.
So is this kind of how you guide your decisions at BoltObserver? Like you're trying to build something that accounts for these problems or risks and permit people, well, as we said at the beginning, permit people to be able to manage things in a non-custodial way, and presumably in a manner that well, is not impervious, but is resistant to regulatory capture, or can operate outside of a regulatory captured environment?
Yeah, so we build in a couple directions. We started this software as a service company just for ease of onboarding and stable distribution, but we are slowly moving towards more open core principles, so you will be able to run some of the things on your own infrastructure. If you're like more sophisticated or care more, you can also have different levels of privacy. So for example, maybe you don't care about sending your balances somewhere. You just want to strictly have some operational insight into it, or you can flip a switch and, I don't know, just share a couple of bits of it, so you still get a lot of upside, but maybe instead of us telling you your inbound is 99% used, we can tell you your inbound is more than 80% used, and things like that. So there's levels to how extremely privacy aware we are. Of course, it's a business solution, so it's there. You still need to get some level of visibility to improve the business operations. Otherwise, it's a black box and you can't do anything about it. So it's always a compromise on how you approach the system, but we're trying to build with the awareness of it and make assumptions that at some point people will want to have as much privacy as possible, or run it in different aspects or different configurations depending on what their use case are and privacy needs, or if they're a public routing node, maybe they don't necessarily care because everything is already public, but also you're not going to be using a B2B software as a service solution as a extremely privacy conscious individual that is fighting the government.
Right. Do you think the Lightning Network as it is now, I mean, we both alluded to the value-enabled web, so-called, a little bit earlier, which again, I think may be the catalyst. I mean, that and gaming, which I guess you could lump into the same category, may be the catalyst for, the next billion Bitcoiners. Because I think a lot of the people, I mean, it'll still happen, but a lot of the people that were really anti-fiat and really focused on, monetary philosophy or monetary history, a lot of those have been sucked into Bitcoin already. But the sheer financial incentives that could be built into existing digital infrastructure, I think are going to be extremely compelling, whether it's gaming, whether it's social media, whether it's content consumption, whether it's content creation, writing, all that stuff. If it can be infused with sats, if it can be infused with Bitcoin, I just think the experience improves dramatically, the quality of the content improves dramatically, and that will be a substantial catalyst for getting people to flip the switch or have a light bulb moment around Bitcoin. Do you think the Lightning Network is at that stage where it can accommodate that amount of activity or that diversity of use cases or integrations? Like, what's your sense of where we are in terms of that picture and the technological capacity at the moment?
I mean, we're definitely not onboarding 1 billion users in the next 3 months. So I don't think we're ready for that, because while the infrastructure has gotten better, the network is still relatively small. So we definitely need more investments in infrastructure and building this out to enable like a 1 billion user scale. But on the other hand, Lightning Network works. I've had significantly less problems paying with Bitcoin than with credit cards anywhere that I could pay with Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a two-sided answer. Like, can we onboard 1 billion people tomorrow? No. Can we onboard 10 million per quarter? Possibly. It's just not happening overnight. But we're definitely getting there. It's going to take a bit to polish all the corners, to improve the UX and everything. Because it also depends, like, can Stripe and Cash App scale to 1 billion users? Probably. Can you onboard 1 billion users on a self-custodial way? No way.
Right.
Like, there's not even enough time to explain the recovery seeds to 1 billion users.
What's your what development or infusion of sats via Lightning into existing or novel digital services or infrastructure are you most excited about? You alluded to podcasting 2.0 earlier, value for value, and gaming. What do you think is either the most interesting, or do you think will be part of that catalyst that I just referred to in terms of casting a much broader net and bringing more people in?
I'm insanely bullish on machine-to-machine payments. And I have this crazy dream that at some point I will be, when I'm late for a meeting, able to tell my smart car, you can spend up to, I don't know, 100 sets and just negotiate with the cars in front of me to move to the right lane so I can speed to the meeting.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think it comes before like zaps on social media, but
we're still a bit away from that, but it's completely possible. It could be done right now. I mean, if you're paying for electricity by streaming sets, why couldn't two cars talk to each other and say, oh, I'm going to accept 5K sets to move to the right lane. I'm on a joy trip. I don't care.
Right.
Things like that. But also, I think all of the things that you said are great, and I like all of them. But I think that this will open a whole new world of business use cases that we're not currently capable of imagining. Because it's like trying to come up with what the internet is going to bring in 1980.
Yeah.
Airbnb, are you insane? Like nobody, somebody over internet is going to pay me and I'm going to give them the key to my house and they're going to sleep on my couch. Like, nope. In the same way, I think that making payments ubiquitous in everything could open a completely new ways of doing things. For example, the electric scooters and that garbage that lies on every sidewalk. Currently, you have to have a company that drives around, charges them, replaces them. But no, if that device was slightly smarter, you could pick it up, put it in your garage, charge it, put it back in. While it's charging you, it can stream you sets because you don't need to have an account anywhere to get sets. You just need your Lightning address or QR code or something, but like you don't need to have my bank account. It makes sense to pay you 50 cents because it's cheap and there's no point of sale costs and things like that. So I think Lightning can enable tons of new things like that that currently don't make sense because exchanging money for services is so complicated. It works if you're a merchant, but you need to be a registered business and like have the infrastructure for it and bank account, but that's a very high barrier thing. Maybe not in the Western world, but slightly less developed or still developing countries. Nobody has that, but also operating with cash is not the most practical, but if you combine the two, you can operate at a very small scale, unlimited across the globe, then I think that enables us to do very cool shit that we just don't have the capacity to imagine right now.
I totally agree. You know, the scooter example is so fascinating because it makes me think streaming, like frictionless streaming payments, let's say, that everyone can opt into without needing to have anything other than, you know, an address effectively. You know, it almost brings an ownership incentive. It's so many things, especially like internet connected devices, let's say, it creates an ownership incentive. How should I put this? It broadens it offers an ownership incentive to anybody who's interacting with the thing. So for example, like you find that scooter and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to be paid 50 sats a minute to plug it into my wall at home. The electricity it's consuming for me to charge it is 20 sats a minute. So there's a 30 sats a minute spread. I'm going to go and care for this scooter, right? I'm going to go and plug it into my wall. I'm going to be paid 10,000 sats total. And then I'm going to return it to the sidewalk or wherever, or maybe it returns itself. I'm not even using it, but I'm caring for it in a sense because I have a financial incentive to do that. You know, so just the way that streaming payments allows for financial incentives to be both aligned and most likely greatly amplified is amazing. And then your example of the cars, it also, I think, offers the capacity for a financial incentive or a financial dynamic to be added to pretty much any given preference. You know, so to your example, like right now you say, well, I want to be able to pass that guy, that guy that doesn't know he's blocking me from passing, doesn't know I'm in a rush. And there's no way, one, there's no way to communicate that. And two, there's no way to incentivize him to acquiesce to what I want. But as you say, if that could be done automatically, you know, you could just set your setting in the car. Hey, if someone pays me 5,000 sats, you know, reduce speed, allow them to pass or whatever it might be, then, you know, not only is that a better deal for everybody, but it's just this idea of so many more preferences that we might have entering into the market environment. Maybe you could put it that way. Whereas right now, like, you know, everything in the market environment is the things that you directly buy and sell, or you have the capacity to buy and sell. It seems like this is going to broaden that tremendously, because your capacity to so-called buy and sell is going to be dramatically broadened. And man, the behaviors that's going to permit and incentivize and in my opinion improve. I mean, like anything, I'm sure there'll be some downside somewhere, but it's just, as you say, it's impossible to imagine, but it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities are endless. I think there are some potential downsides, or at least friction to this, because people don't want to think about it. There's a reason why Netflix has a subscription, not 50 cents per episode,
right?
Because you just pay and then you binge. Like, you don't want to make another 100,000 purchasing decisions.
Right. The fewer the better, typically.
Yeah, exactly. But that can be abstracted away. So like, you're not, every time I want to send a tip or stream sets, I'm not gonna press accept or something. No, I just have some allotments. Okay, I'm willing to spend this much per month or on this, and then just distribute it and figure it out. And like, my phone will learn over time, okay, you're on average listening to 50 hours of podcast a month, they will distribute it like that. And you've boosted John's show 7 times, so you like him more, give him a bit more than the rest, and things. But that's all solvable problems with data. And that's definitely something that will need to happen, because like, when you talk to normal people, no, but wouldn't you like to just pay for everything so you don't pay subscription? No, I like subscriptions. I don't care about them. Until you figure out you have subscription to 17 content services and you're just watching things on YouTube, and then people start to reevaluate it. But I think we will, the way the current web works, it's pretty ingrained into society right now. So it will take some time to get all the bad habits out. Like, explaining value to a Bitcoiner is very simple. But explaining to somebody that has been listening to podcasts for free that, oh no, but like, why don't you send that guy some sets? It's like, why? It's free.
Yeah.
So we will need to present this in a way that people will understand it, to make it more broadly appealing. But I think it's completely doable. We just need to come up with the right way to do it. And kind of get down from the high horse that we as Bitcoiners like to ride a lot of times, and maybe make it a bit more approachable to people, because normal people don't spend this much amount of time thinking about money.
Right.
Like a normal Bitcoiner thinks about money more in one day than a normal person in 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. But how would you make it more approachable? Or how do you? What's your process when you're having conversations with normies? How do you make it more approachable?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm going to start from a different end, from how we even talk about it. I think for Lightning to succeed, nobody should use the word Lightning in 5 years, because like, you're just not Bitcoin. Talking about internet, or not just
or sats or
stats, or you just like, pay me $10. I'm not specifying, oh, use this app to pay me with PayPal and 3 other acronyms that only people on the inside know. It just should be ubiquitous. Yeah, you have your something that looks like an email that's actually your Nostr handle, that's also your Lightning address. People shouldn't know what's happening underneath. It just works. Like, you're opening YouTube, you're not thinking about how the DNS request was made and how the packets were routed, and like, people don't care about that. And people shouldn't know about it. It should be abstracted away in a sense that it just works. And that's something that will make things more attractive to people. One of the pet peeves that I have in the industry is that UX for everything just sucks. And like, I don't know, I've been tinkering around in this space for a while, so I have probably 100 Lightning wallets and accounts on every possible service, and all of that services have 20K sets here, 20K sets there. Like, even if I want to consolidate it, how do you send the entire amount? You can't. And, oh, fees might be this much, I'm going to leave this much here. Like, it's simple things like that. But like when you think about it, it's annoying. It's horribly annoying. Like, you just have one login. Stacker News wants my set. Okay, I'm going to have a limit. Okay, Stacker News can use up to 100 sets per day on my tips, things like that. So we need to make this just work together. Not
I agree.
Accounts and accounts, not and all of that. So everything should be like one app or your node. You have the keys at home, node runs somewhere in the cloud, whatever. Like green light, what Breeze is doing right now. Something in that direction that enables just an integration of everything together, that it just works.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of sounds like that's wrapped up in the notion of like a decentralized identity of some kind, where you have a unified identity and you only reveal as much as you need to, depending upon the service or app that you're using, but it all in some manner is managed within that identity. So you don't need to have basically 100 different identities and 100 different logins and 100 different addresses and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's probably a fairly difficult challenge to overcome, but it seems like people are working on it.
Yeah, I mean, the centralized identity thing has been a problem that people have been trying to solve for a very long time. Doesn't seem that we made that much progress in the last 50 years. But on the other hand, like now I just recently had a conversation with somebody regarding Noster and keys and how people will handle that. And I still think that normal people don't want hardware devices. So we need to figure out some way how to deal with that, because in the end, it always comes down to public key cryptography. But the premise of here's, I don't know, 24 words or a hex string that you need to remember, or you will lose access to all of your data, all of your funds, that's not a good proposal that people love.
Yeah.
It's a very high barrier for people to go into. It might be beneficial to them in terms of actually breaking the mentality and training wheels that, okay, now you actually have the ownership of your money, your data, your things like that. But there's a lot of friction on that path that it's not. If we want higher adoption, we kind of at least need to lower that barrier a bit, or make some sort of common sense approach to how to handle this. I mean, everybody already has a device that can reasonably securely store things. It's called a phone. We've been carrying them around them for quite a while. So there might be a way to do something around that. Of course, it's not as secure as you would want it to be for your life savings, but I also think that significantly more Bitcoin will be lost on hardware wallets and encrypted backups than was ever stolen from any exchange.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But it's that age, because security, I mean, I think there's a relatively interesting discussion to be had about the problem of security being incredibly influential in the very in the very structure of civilization, how civilization emerges, because it's always about what's the most valuable thing. Well, the most valuable thing is the thing that's fought over the most. And when you have the most valuable thing, how do you make sure that no other people get it? you know, and that creates hierarchy of kings and governments and power, and all the way down to your own an individual. Because people have, let's because you, as you say, like, people don't like the notion of having a private key for all their money or all their online identity or whatever. But, you know, people have stored their most precious items, jewelry, cash, gold, for a long time in a bank safety deposit box, right? And that was considered, you know, the vault within the vault. And that's where I put the stuff that I just cannot lose. And, you know, by and large, well, I should be careful how I say this, because there's been many, many instances where that trust has ultimately been misplaced or violated, but people developed a comfort around how to secure the most important thing, you know? And so whether it's a diamond ring, or whether it's a bar of gold, or whether it's a steel plate stamped with 12 words, there's at least some familiarity with the notion of securing the things that are of the greatest value. Now, you know, we're supposing that those things are going to be even more valuable, because it's basically limitless how much value that information can contain. That information can contain all of your wealth, and it can contain all of your identity. And so that's far more valuable than just a few, you know, gold bars or diamond rings or whatever. But again, it comes back to that issue: is civilization is predicated on the ability to manage ownership of the most valuable things and information, let's say. And so how do we solve that problem? And one of the things that I often think about is, you know, you talk about, you know, how do you make it more usable, and how do you abstract away the complexity? But I do wonder, like, how much complexity do you want to abstract away, and how much do you want to leave in, so that it's the user that's forced to change their behavior rather than the technology? And this is perhaps a broader discussion about Bitcoin itself. You know, like, let's say in terms of protocol development, how much do you just want to keep making changes, so because you're catering to the more quote unquote normal people, under some assumption that adoption is not happening fast enough? And how much do you want to leave it more as it is, not make as many concessions, not cater to the, you know, the imperfections or the trepidations of prospective users, and in doing so force them to change their perspective and behavior on things? And I think this somewhat gets to the notion of, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Safe explored a little bit in the Bitcoin Standard, but, you know, the cultural influence of the money in use, let's say. And if we really are saying that Bitcoin is, you know, potentially the catalyst for a type of renaissance, well, how much do we want to cater to the behavior of so many people that we might agree ought to be upgraded or improved anyways? You know what I'm trying to say here? Like, how much do we want to let it change us versus us change it? And if it's the latter, maybe we end up destroying it by leaning too far into the us changing it approach to it.
No, I agree, and I think you touched this quite significantly at one of the Closing the Loop episodes with Gigi. This is a particular topic, but I mean, we shouldn't be catering to everything that people have now. But to return to the first point you made, yes, people have been historically taught to protect the most valuable thing, but in the recent years, or last couple 10 decades, that thing has become digital. And so, like, if you had I don't know, a gold bar hidden in a wall at home, that was significantly harder to steal than your Bitcoin, who you can just transfer across the world in an instant. I still had to come to your home, found the wall, steal it, or I don't know, hold you hostage until you tell me that. So through the advancement of technologies, the security implications changed a bit in a way that it's now basically the playground is global for theft and everything. And it became significantly more complex. But to your point, we as a civilization definitely made people very lazy in terms of we will take care of you, and that's
Right.
like the typical no ownership, just be a happy citizen, pay taxes, and we will take care of you kind of approach that people have, and I hate it so much. But I definitely don't want to, for like the Bitcoin community to go into that direction. But I still think that it comes back to a conversation that I have with many Bitcoiners. Like Bitcoin should still be a tool for people and a usable tool. So you don't need to know the white paper by hand to be allowed to use Bitcoin. It just should be usable for you. Of course, we should slowly or in a measured way drive people towards improvement, to think in the way that they should, to have self-ownership, to actually understand what they're doing instead of just being complacent and think that somebody else will solve all of their problem, because that's what brought us to the place where we are, that we actually need Bitcoin. But it's still, I think you can agree that there is a step towards that direction that can be taken without compromising Bitcoin, because there's lots of things that could be improved in this ecosystem in terms of usability and user experience without compromising any of the principles.
I definitely agree with that statement. I just don't know where the line is. You know, like I don't know how far is too far. And I mean, the market will ultimately decide, but you know, I don't know, when the market has such a profound influence on the mechanics of all this, I don't know how you navigate the proper balance of those two things. So, I mean, we will obviously find out, but
I mean, the markets always tend to overcorrect. So we will either go too far in one direction and then pull back, or it's hard to say where the line is, but because we don't know how far we can go. It's the same as, I don't know, encryption. At first it was, yeah, okay, it's not that important. Then at some point, oh, maybe let's encrypt the banking information because my credit card number is still something that I care about. Then the governments feel, oh, people are not using encryption, let's store everything. So it's an evolving story. And now we realized we made lots of mistakes. So hopefully we learned something. And I wish we could just snap a finger and people would wake up, start to own their own assets and stop using banks. But I still think we need to make somewhat of a slightly less radical approach to certain things, just so we make it slightly more easier for people to actually understand us.
Yeah, well, sure. I guess part of the question is, what are the risks of, you know, any of the things you decide to work on, and what, if any of them, any of those directions would be pose existential risks to Bitcoin? Because those, you know, by definition, those are the ones that you definitely want to avoid, and the other ones, you know, you can either get away with or are ultimately beneficial. You know, so it's to what degree does the direction and the approach increase any of the known and unknown existential risks to Bitcoin's success or existence, you know?
Yeah, that's going to be something that we'll have to figure out along the way. And when you're a kid, you always eat some dirt and your immune system learns to handle it. But you try to avoid the glowing stuff. So hopefully we don't eat anything glowing, and the dirt just makes us stronger in terms of FTXs and things like that.
Right. What, if any, do you think what are the biggest risks you see to, I guess this can be two-part, Bitcoin's adoption, which we've kind of covered already, and Bitcoin's persisting existence or continued existence?
Well, I am very pessimistic in terms of how things are developing in the Western world, because while it won't be completely outlawed, there's a strong chance that we essentially have not two chains, but basically two Bitcoins, one that exists in a KYC world and the one that is non-KYC. So maybe you can exit the KYC world back to the free world, but you won't be able to get back into it. That's definitely, I think, one of the things that is closer than we think it is, because it's already happening on a large scale with most of the people using custodial services or buying KYC Bitcoins. So it's already everywhere. And if you buy something, you're using a wallet that you did KYC, or the merchant needs to know something about you. So I think with the crackdowns that are coming, that's a strong possibility that we need to try to avoid, because that would significantly slow the progress, especially because there's not enough demand for real Bitcoin usage in the more developed world. Because it's just, you talk with people in Europe, US, you have 17 apps on your phone where you can send each other $10. So it's less of a use case if you're not more deeper into the system and use value for value podcasting and all of that, and you actually know. So like, it's harder to convince people that they need another app, as they see it, to send money around when they can already Venmo, PayPal, or whatever, everyone that they need. Versus in more developing world, when those are not available, or people don't even have bank accounts, things like that, that essentially they just skip the generation. They went from cash to mobile phones, and so it's much easier to present the actual use case, and they use remittances, they get money from abroad, things like that. So I'm very bearish on the West and very bullish on the global South, for lack of the better word.
And what about, so that's adoption, what about risks to Bitcoin more broadly, if any, that you see?
I mean, not necessarily risks. It's more gonna be, I think it's gonna be rocky, but it will just mean that we might see some shifts around the world where developers are, where companies are getting built, if the environments become too hostile to developments in that direction. I think, but that's good. In the end, that's probably gonna be very beneficial to the world, because we can, in a way, rebuild it or go more towards the sovereign individual test. This is where you're essentially shopping for a better jurisdiction, as I'm doing right now myself. But the risk is that this might take a while, so we might see a lot of pain before we see the sunlight in that direction. But it also presents very good opportunities for companies, people, spaces, countries even, to lift themselves up and create a better world in which we all want to live, instead of the one we're currently heading to.
Yeah, totally agree. You mentioned, I'm not sure if it was in the DMs before this, or I think it was, might have been the original Calendly invite, but you also had some, controversial opinions, or, opinions that differ from the norm. So we're coming up on the end of the show now. So I was going to ask you, one, if there was anything else you wanted to cover or introduce or discuss today, and two, what some of those controversial opinions might be.
That's, I mean, I've probably mentioned some of them throughout the show. As you can see, I'm extremely pro-European Union, and
I don't think that's, I don't think your disdain for the EU is a controversial opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that maybe Bitcoin development is not focusing on all the right things currently, or we're getting a bit too righteous in some ways. Like it all comes back to the kind of discussion that we touched. It's like, how much should we change Bitcoin versus how much Bitcoin should change us? But it also goes back to what do we need in the ecosystem, or should we leave things as they are? For example, RBF, no RBF. I could argue both sides. I just think that we in the industry occasionally like to create problems where they're none, just because Bitcoiners can only agree on one thing, and that's TikTok next block. Everything else is just up for debate, and we're always happy to debate everything endlessly, from stainless steel to your favorite.
That's what happens when you get a lot of disagreeable, strong-willed people on a pursuit of truth, right? I mean, everyone wants to know what the truest truth is.
I agree, and it's fun and cute and everything, but occasionally it's just like, come on, guys, can we just not do this again?
So when you refer to the righteousness of some of the direction and development community, let's say, do you mean the righteousness is characterizing the unwillingness to introduce novel changes, and you think, you know, the opposite approach, or an approach more willing to, experiment's the wrong word, but adopt certain changes is preferable?
Yes and no. The problem is that you can have the newest NFT on Bitcoin debate could be characterized as the same as RBF. It wasn't meant to be used, or shouldn't be used like that. People are still using it, and I'm not saying that either of those two are the biggest issues, or that I want to change anything on either of those. I just think that both debates to some extent were pointless, but there were tons of opinions being made on either side, and there's value in both sides. But should we change something just because there's a couple holy opinions in the space, and maybe the other side that is arguing for state to remain the same has worse reputation, or comes more from a business side? I mean, sure, we had the same debate a couple of years ago in terms of block space, so I can see how people should still have some bad feelings around business use cases in terms of Bitcoin and things like that. But I just think that having civil wars like that is very good for the enemy and very bad for the ecosystem itself. And I think that the enemy is closer than we think, and we should maybe focus slightly more outwards and see what we can change in the world, not just internally in the space, and who to convince what piece of meat is the best one for you tomorrow.
I mean, I don't disagree, but my two responses that come to mind is, one, I think this is just kind of the contentiousness and care that you get when people recognize the preciousness or the value of something, or, you know, or are attempting to steward something that they believe is of the utmost value in the proper way. And so you get these, you know, conflicting opinions, and that much kind of emotion wrapped up in it all. And then, you know, as you're saying, the murky, muddy waters of rough consensus are, I mean, it's kind of like animal spirits in a sense, right? You know, to borrow a Keynesian phrase, because it's like, well, how does this stuff take place? And, you know, and again, that's probably a feature, not a bug ultimately, but it creates a lot of confusion sometimes. And then, you know, when you mention civil war, what came to mind, and this may not be an appropriate analogy or comparison, but what came to mind was the American Civil War. I watched the Ken Burns documentary like 6 months ago. It's phenomenal, 10-part series. And that was just a horrific thing, right? 600,000, U.S. soldiers died. The most soldiers that have ever died in any conflict the U.S. was engaged in. But the result of it was a, more unified, strong, powerful nation, whatever your opinions are, on the nation state and the world as it exists today. But I wonder if that's not, the case here. These civil wars, these big fights that are played out, maybe they have to be, because that's the only way to resolve the conflict. And, hopefully their resolution winds up in something that's better for it and stronger for it and not weaker for it. And also part of the analogy that I thought when you mentioned that was like, surely the French and the British and whatever other European powers would have been happy to see the US fighting amongst itself in the mid 1800s, because they were still, trying to jockey for, supremacy and influence and all that kind of stuff. And that was probably correct. And I'm sure they were doing all they could to maybe foster the continuation of that. But again, punchline being they came out of that and presumably wound up being stronger, more unified as a result. So I don't know how you avoid those contentious conflicts when there's something so valuable at stake. That's the 21 million Bitcoin question.
Yeah, no, you have a strong point, and I just hope that we end up being the United States in that story, not some Latin American country when the CIA then in the middle of the civil war just installs a new government.
Yeah, well, that's a very good rebuttal. I'll grant you that. Well, man, this has been great. I appreciate you making the time today and for a discussion. Any places you want to direct people or anything like that, Twitter handle or business you've been working on before we shut it down?
Yeah, totally. Come check out what we're doing at Bolt.Observer or BoltObserver on Twitter. That's where we update everything that is currently going on. And we just released a couple of new features lately in terms of liquidity management, supporting more implementation. So follow us and figure out what we're up to. And thanks for having me here. It was a fun discussion. Definitely touched a lot of interesting subjects.
Yeah, for sure. Again, thanks for the time and best of luck with the projects, and keep in touch. We'll talk again sometime in the future.
Perfect. Have a nice
All right,
rest of the
brother.
week.
Take care.
Bye.
You too.